You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast listeners. I'm your co-host, Kristen Civiletto, and with me is Julia Rose. We've got you all over the world in 102 countries and territories in all 50 states. And why? We know why, because we are bringing you the very best authors out there today. And today is no exception. We are thrilled that #1 New York Times bestselling author Susan Wiggs is joining us for a fantastic conversation about Wayward Girls. Welcome, Susan.
Kristen, thank you. It's always a pleasure to come back and visit with you.
That's right. We had you on in the show in 2023 to talk about Welcome to Beachtown, a book that we absolutely loved. And so, you come back on the show. You are a friend of this show always, and we absolutely love talking with you. So thank you for coming back.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure.
Now, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about your background. They always love to hear what you're doing outside of writing. And so, for those of you who listened to the previous podcast, you might know this already. But those of you who are fans and you're all over the world, she is an internationally best-selling author. Her books, millions of them, have been translated into numerous languages. They're sold all over the world. And that is because she is always getting to these incredible topics that are important to people, to women. They're heartwarming stories, they're deep stories. And today's Wayward Girls is no exception. Although I think with this one, Susan, you've kind of gone even a little deeper into subject matter that, we're going to talk about it, but it is deep and important. So we're really glad you did.
Well, thank you for that intro. I'm excited to talk about this book. This is actually my favorite moment in the life of a book. It's when it no longer belongs to me. It's not my book anymore. I'm not responsible for it. I'm sending it out into the world, and it's now in the hands of readers. And I love that because reading is such a creative individual activity. Everybody brings their own, special self to a story, and it's different for every single reader. And so this is my favorite moment. I have done my best, and so it's, out of my hands.
Well, not only have you done your best, other people think that as well. And I just wanted to read 2 comments about your book from 2 other friends of Bookstorm, Robert Dugoni and Adriana Trigiani, both of whom have been on the show multiple times. Robert Dugoni said, after decades of bestsellers, Wayward Girls might be Susan Wiggs's opus, a gut-wrenching story of survival, friendship, and justice. Masterful. And I love also what Adriana had to say. The magnificent Susan Wiggs takes a leap into the history of women, a page turner replete with mystery and suspense. We are so excited to talk about this book. And I don't know if you have a copy of it there that you want to show what this cover looks like, but it's...
I do. The cover was quite a departure for my books as well.
Yes.
We went from beach book,
yeah,
fun little beach read, to a pretty serious locked door with the light streaming in. And so just the process of getting to this look for the book was the source of a lot of discussions for my publisher. So hopefully it works. And you never know until the book is actually in the stores and lined up on the shelf with everything else. And so I guess we'll see.
I love what Adriana said about a history of women, because that really, you gave a voice, to some people. So I'd love to give our readers and listeners some background into what we're going to be talking about today. And I won't give away any spoilers. And if you have anything that you want to add, please feel free. So this book begins in Buffalo, in New York in 1968. And we meet Marin and her best friend. And these are 2 teens that are growing up in the Fruit Belt area of Buffalo. Marin, after going to a movie with a boy, is soon sent off and confined to an institution called the Good Shepherd, run by Sisters of Charity nuns. It's actually what's referred to colloquially as the Magdalene laundry, where the girls are left unschooled and simply toil away for the diocese. We see that these teens are locked away merely for being gay, pregnant, or simply disobedient. the darkness that pervades those years is something that continues to follow them throughout their lives. And then they reconnect as adults. And what a story. So I really don't want to go any more in detail in just our synopsis. But if you have anything you want to add before we get into it, please do.
No, that was a pretty good summary. I appreciate that because it is a big book and it spans decades. And so I always have trouble with my elevator pitch. So I really appreciate that you encapsulated it like that.
Of course. All right. So we mentioned that this is we meet teens at the very beginning, and we're on this coming of age journey with Marin. And Marin is met with some very mature topics. I mean, dating, sexual education, domestic violence, teen pregnancy, the list goes on right away. It dives deep really, really soon. And many of these issues are due to a lack of education, and society at the time was more than happy to put these outliers away and out of the public view. And on top of that, women's education at large was discouraged. They were told not to worry about it. Don't worry about it. Get married. You don't need to go to school. Could some of these issues, especially when it comes to things like sex ed and domestic violence and things, could that have been avoided with proper education and resources and support? Is that what we're working towards in society now?
Yeah, I think so. I think that a lot of the challenges that Marin and the other girls face in the novel, I believe they're very realistically drawn for 1968. It was, way before your time, but it was a time of, I don't want to say innocence, but a time of maybe ignorance is the word, a time when we weren't so frank about issues. And so a lot of the challenges could have been mitigated or at least better understood if they'd had access to real education and supportive adults and truthful information about their bodies and their choices. So in Wayward Girls, the system, I tried to portray it as a system that thrives on silence and shame, particularly when it came to young women stepping outside of narrow expectations. Especially for Catholic girls in their Catholic schools in Western New York, and a lot of areas of the country, sex education was limited. Or if it was there at all, it was very moralistic, or it was usually just absent, especially in institutions run by the church. And girls were expected to obey, not to question. And when they did step outside the lines, whether through trauma or rebellion or simple curiosity, the response was often a punishment, rather than guidance. And so society didn't really want to fix this problem, it wanted to hide it. And this is why places like the Good Shepherd existed. It wanted to lock them away, hide what's messy and inconvenient, especially with girls who didn't fit, because they were also, subject to these institutions as well. They weren't necessarily sexual or anything like that, but they didn't fit in for whatever reason. So there's that. And what's heartbreaking and I think still relevant is how a lack of access to education and support leaves young people vulnerable. In the book, I wanted to show how resourceful and intelligent these girls became despite everything working against them. They formed their own alliances. I loved how they learned to rely on each other. They passed notes, they stole books, they whispered what little they knew to each other. But imagine what they could have done if they had the actual tools and the trust and support to do it. So ultimately, Wayward Girls isn't just about the harm caused by ignorance, but it's about the power of knowledge and friendship and the resilience to push back against it. And that's actually how I avoided making the book just a really hand-wringing, terrible, dark, mess of things, because I was able to play upon the resourcefulness and resilience of these girls.
You just said the power of knowledge, the importance of the, power of knowledge. Do you feel like, and maybe this is true even for today, do you
Mhm.
feel that people have a disproportionate amount of trust in the church to be taking care of things a certain way
Even
and they
even
just kind of
today.
turned a
Yep.
blind eye.
Yep, in 1968, absolutely. The parents and even me, I was a little younger than the girls were in this book. So, I was a really little kid in the 60s, but I still remember coming home complaining about a teacher, and my parents would say, "Well, what did you do? What'd you do wrong?" And so I think that was really, really the case back in the 60s. And today, we still want to place our trust in these age-old institutions because I can't deny that they have brought comfort and support and, positive things to a lot of people, but not to everybody, especially not in this context. And so, but I think that if we're teaching our kids anything, please teach them to question authority and to ask and ask and ask until they get the answers, not just take, the pat answer.
Yeah. I'm one of those kids who originally I was in a Catholic school and I had to leave in the middle of the year because apparently I was asking too many questions about things. I was like, well, where is this in the
You
Bible? And where is confession? And what is transfiguration? And
You were that inconvenient child because I think it definitely feeds into the power of these organizations to follow their rules and not question their rules. And so when a questioning child comes up like you were, they'd much rather, just push you aside or ask you to go to another school or, something like that.
absolutely. Well, I want to ask you about this notion of accountability, especially with regard to these Magdalene laundries, as we're talking about. And I know you want to tell us a little more about those. But there
Mhm,
are many wrongs committed under the guise of religion. And,
mhm,
that's certainly been the case for eons and eons. But I want to ask you about this. New York is now allowing sex abuse survivors to
mhm,
bring claims long after the fact, and there was a window when they could do that. So we're
mhm.
starting to see a lot of these cases now go to trial because it's been a few years. I want to ask you. A lot of people say, "Well, leave well enough alone. This happened a long time ago." Do you think there's value to going back even decades and highlighting some of the harm and abuse that occurred? What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. That's actually one of the driving forces behind this book is because I don't want to add spoilers, but the healing and the justice is a long time coming for these young women. And it's because I absolutely believe there is always help available, whether it happened a year ago or 50 years ago, however long ago. And I think that it's there's a value in exposing these stories even decades later because sometimes it takes decades for survivors to even begin to find the words. I actually just finished a nonfiction book. What was it called? It was called The Tell by, I want to say maybe Amy Griffin. And it's a memoir of her memories were so repressed of the abuse that she suffered that she never even knew that it happened to her until decades later. And it's a nonfiction book. And so it's a real thing. And I just think that sometimes the institutions like the Magdalene laundries, they thrived on secrecy and silence and under the protection of religious authority, and the damage that was caused um, didn't end when the doors finally closed. And that, when I reached the book is divided into different, sections based on the time periods. And when I reached, a place of catharsis after, the big piece of the ordeal was over, I knew that the book wasn't over because the damage doesn't end when the doors are closed. The trauma just ripples forward through families, communities, and even through generations. There's now, we're learning a lot about generational trauma. And so one of the reasons that I wrote Wayward Girls was to shine a light on these hidden places and the very real girls who were locked away, not because they were dangerous, but because they were inconvenient. They were too loud, too curious, too vulnerable. And so telling these stories now is not just about justice for the past, it's about changing how we see girlhood and authority and silence in the present. And I love the fact that New York had extended the statute of limitations for certain crimes. And one of my favorite moments in creating this book wasn't really a writer moment. It was that there's an audiobook, an unabridged audiobook that's recorded that will be released on the same day as the book. And they asked me to read the author's note. I went into a studio in Seattle and, a very high-tech studio, and I got to record the author's note and the acknowledgments. Um, and I really want to, and that's where I talk about the look back laws that exist to try to help people. I think they're long overdue. I think survivors often carry such a deep shame, and they might not be able to speak about it until later in life. And so legal time limits shouldn't outpace that emotional healing. And so by changing the laws, the states that do this, they're acknowledging that reality, which I so appreciate, and it gives people a chance to be heard. Just as importantly, find one another. And that's
Yes.
something that also takes place in the book as well. I loved the various, points of reunion in the book as well. And so it's a unique kind of healing. It happens when people who are harmed in similar ways come together. And there's not a lot of, there are PTSD groups for soldiers and people who were harmed in those ways. I think it's less common to find them, especially back then, for people who suffered kind of unique, or not unique, but obscure harms like the girls in The Good Shepherd. You can't really talk about it to anybody who hasn't. You can talk about it, but it's not the same as somebody who's walked that same path. And so I hope Wayward Girls sparks some conversations and maybe even some accountability. Who knows?
And healing. Yeah,
Yes,
it was
thank
very
you.
well put.
Yeah. So that was a lot of like individual and localized, events that are going on in these girls' lives and, people
Mhm.
in Buffalo at large. But there's also an undertone of a global event going on. So
Mhm.
there's this dichotomy of peace and love versus war, which was unavoidable in the 60s,
Yeah.
So, but that seemed like it was mirrored in Marin's life as well. So her life should be simple and innocent and peaceful. She's 15. She's picking fruit around the corner,
Mhm.
but she has an intrusive stepfather, a closed off mother, a father who passed away, a brother being drafted for war. Everything around her is going a little bit out of control, and disrupting like her peace. And I was curious if this was intentional to kind of mirror and be a microcosm of the helplessness that Americans were facing for this time period.
That's a really beautifully observed question, and I'm really glad that you asked it that way. I think that Marin's personal turmoil is very much a reflection of the broader unrest that America was going through in the late 60s and individual families as well. And I wanted her story to feel grounded in the lived experience of that era. And so, so many people, especially young people, were grappling with these massive destabilizing forces that were far beyond their control. The cultural upheaval, the war, her shifting family dynamics, which I think is pretty common to families, and a growing distrust of institutions and the places that once seemed untouchable, and suddenly there's. But I was a little. I thought I took a risk. I was a little worried about the opening of the book where we just meet Marin picking apples and flirting with a boy. It seems like, any teenager, and I didn't want to go, I didn't want to just plunge her into turmoil, but I worried, does she seem real to us? Is she a little too idealized? But I think the external chaos, the draft and the protests and the generational divides and everything, also mirrors the chaos that she's experiencing at home. 15 is an awkward age. You're between, you're still a kid, but you want to be grown up. You want to belong to this family, but you feel abandoned because the stepdad is awful. And so, like the country itself, she's trying to make sense of a world that just feels unfair to her, and suddenly not her safe place anymore. And so, that fruit belt should be like her safe haven. It's like a vibrant, close-knit community, but even there, the cracks are showing. They're showing, it's a contrast between what should be and what, what is probably unfolding before her very eyes until she finally catches up with what's happening to her. So yeah, it's a definitely a microcosm of um, life at the time, I hope, and helplessness and disillusionment that we felt at the time. But one of the pleasures and one of the things that I hope makes the book a good read is that you really feel like you're in a different time. She goes to the movie The Graduate. She listens to Pink Floyd, and her mother yells at her for the noise that kind of thing. So I like to think that that aspect of the book just felt very real to any reader. And so I think, like the country, she's full of potential. She doesn't have control. She doesn't have choices, but she gets a little sliver of agency. And that's where her strength lies as a character, that resilience.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to something that you had mentioned earlier, and that is this idea that these women, young women, were bonded through the trauma that they experienced. And it was incredibly interesting in your story to see how it stayed with them their whole lives. It impacted relationships, it impacted the way they raised their kids, it impacted a lot.
Mm.
And what does that mean then for society? Do we need to intervene earlier when we have these mental health concerns relating to abuse? Because the ripple effects are generational, aren't they?
They absolutely are. And it's balancing. I tried to bring insights into trauma and societal responsibility, and but keep the emotional themes of the novel feeling very authentic. And so I think trauma that happens in adolescence doesn't just fade at time. I think it never does, but at certain periods of your life, it just doesn't fade. And so for Marin and the other women in Wayward Girls, the abuse they endured wasn't just physical, it was psychological and institutional and deeply personal. And they were told that they were bad or broken or unworthy, or, and the message can root itself so deeply that it almost becomes part of who they are because it's been drummed into them. And it's really tragic. And so she still hears the sounds and she still sees the flashes of certain moments decades later, because I think what I've read is that trauma imprints itself on the body and the brain. And there was I don't know if you'd call it a self-help book. I think it's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes. Excellent.
And I really believe that it definitely imprints itself so deeply. It could take a lifetime to unlearn those things. And so it changes how you trust. It took her a while to really find the person that she needed to be with for the rest of her life. It impacts how you love and how you see yourself, how you see others. And unless it's addressed with compassion and support and true mental health care, it doesn't just go away. It can seep into relationships, parenting, identity, even stories that people are telling themselves. And so I think we have to recognize there's a real long tail to this
Yes.
mental health journey, especially when it comes to young people, when it comes to anybody. But silence and shame are not the solutions. And what happened in the fictional Good Shepherd, well, it wasn't fictional, but what happened in my book, my fiction novel about the Good Shepherd, is not even ancient history. It's part of, I remembered a babysitter that I had in the 60s, and she went away. And when the girl goes away, it only means one thing. She had an unplanned pregnancy, and God knows what she heard about herself, wherever she was sent to. And so we can't minimize mental health, and we can't moralize pain, especially in girls and women. But the good news is, and I hope that this message kind of comes through from the book, I think that healing is possible. And in stories like this, whether they're fictional or not, um, telling your own story and finding your own voice is part of that process. And so they give voice to what was buried, and they remind us it's never too late to confront the past, to claim your truth, and to choose something better for the next generation. And I hope that we're doing that. I don't know, are we doing that? I think you and I did. We have awesome daughters, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And
Yes,
I
we
have to
do.
say, the way my daughter is raising her daughter, um, I'm a huge fan. Yeah, I think she's a lot more open with Clara, my granddaughter, than I was with her. I thought that I was with her, but when I look at the two of them, I see that progress is being made generation by generation. And so, yeah, so I hopefully the characters in Wayward Girls, have found their way.
Yeah, I love it. It is so beautifully put. And I have to tell you too, we are in the Buffalo Niagara area where this book is set. And I love that you anchored your book here because we do have a dark history of sexual abuse, whether it is from the diocese or from school districts. We seem to have a lot of these situations and cases now coming forward as a result of New York State's law. And you are originally from Olean, New York, not too
I
far from
am.
here, correct?
Until I was about 10 years old, and then my whole family moved overseas. And so I have these really idyllic, fond memories because I didn't have to drive in the snow. I didn't have to, I had like a nice priest. Although I understand that Olean had some real bad apples, but no, I don't have any recollection. And actually, the thing that sparked my whole research journey into this period of time and this issue with the church was that my brother and I had never been back in decades, and we went back in 2021 kind of as a nostalgia trip. We went to look at our old house where we lived, and we found ourselves at a church. And there's something about a space like a church that triggers a lot of memories, the way it smells and the echoes and the way the light falls in this church. It took me back to, I must have been, I think I was probably 6 or 8 years old. And I turned to my brother, he's a couple years older than me, and I said, "You were an altar boy, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I was." And I said, "And did your sleeve catch on fire?" And he said, "Yeah, because he was in charge of the incense thurible that where there's hot coals, and I don't know, he swung it too hard. I don't really know what happens." And he said, "Yeah, I think that happened." And so we started talking about the role of the church, and indeed that you probably noticed that little incident made it into
Yep.
the book in a fictional way, but it was it was such a I don't know, it felt really good to write a book that was grounded in something that was so real to me, but seen through such a different lens. And a couple things that surprised me. I got a lot of help from the Buffalo History Museum and from some local resources there, librarians, thank God. And so one thing that I learned that also made it into the book was in the summer of 1969, Niagara Falls stopped on the American side. They stopped the falls. And of course, the nuns in the book thought it was a miracle, but it's
Right.
explained how that happened later. And then the other thing that I used in the book that I learned was there was a really, really intense race riot in the summer of 1967. And that's how Odessa, the character Odessa, landed at the Good Shepherd. And they actually sent the baseball star Jackie Robinson to help quell the riots in Buffalo. And so the little nuggets like that really bring a time period and a setting to life for me. And so it's always a pleasure to try to weave those into the story.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think I was there as a baby when the falls were halted there. So that's a pretty cool aspect of your story. Well,
Mhm.
I know I want to tell our listeners how to get in touch with you, but I think Julia had a burning question first.
I
Yeah.
know. So my last question for you, and again, we know that this book is just coming out and we don't want to rush you, but we are so curious if you have anything you can share with us about what's coming up next for you.
I almost always have an answer to that question, and this time I got nothing because I'm in my favorite place as a writer, and that is where I'm thinking up my next book, but I haven't spoiled it for myself by writing it down. And so all I can say right now is I know that it's going to feature siblings. the older I get, the closer I get to my siblings. Sadly, my brother passed away of pancreatic cancer. That was one reason we went to Olean together. It was kind of a bucket list thing for him. But my younger sister, and I are just, as close as can be. And so I think, how can that, what stories are going to come out of that? And so I'm at that searching, seeking stage, which I love because it's super fun. And then my publisher is really good. They're going to have future editions. They often reissue popular books or bring them back. So I'm happy about that. So my next new title is TBD. But thank
Awesome.
you for asking.
That's a lovely place to be. The
It is.
possibilities are endless.
Yeah. And we're so sorry about your brother and
Thank you.
his
Thank you.
loss.
We were so close and
Yeah.
he was such a bright light. He was a really prolific artist. And so he left behind, we think around 1,000 original paintings. And
Wow.
so he's there, it's not the same, but they're all over my home and they're all over, everybody in the family, his kids and grandkids. And so we're trying to keep the memories alive. And he's very much, he was very much a presence when I was working on the book.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. What a beautiful tribute to him.
Mhm.
Well, I want to tell our listeners you can be found online, at least at susanwiggs.com.
Yep.
You keep in touch with your listeners. You send updates if they sign up, but you're also all over social media on TikTok, Facebook, X, Instagram. And I want to tell you too, if you ever do come back to the area, we would love to see you in person since we're
I
here
know.
and
I
help in
want to
any way
come.
to support the book because we are just so thrilled for you. And thank you for coming on the show. People are
Oh,
going to love this book. It is
oh.
powerful and satisfying.
Thank you for having me. I hope I get to come back and visit with you again one day.
We do too. Take care now, Susan.
I am loving this conversation and this book because having it set in Buffalo to me is special. Not just because we're here, but because I know that this community and through my own experiences, your experiences, I know that this community has been hurt a lot, many times, over and over in very various ways. And having, how we said earlier, microcosm, like a book that kind of encapsulates one experience of that pain and gives it healing and, makes it a bigger story than one person,
Yeah,
is
I
special
agree
to
with
me.
you. That spiritual abuse runs deep. And it's interesting because this area was referred to as the burned over district because there were revivals and all kinds of, faith related movements that happened here. But now we see the corresponding, harm that came from some of this as well. So I agree with you. I think it is an intriguing book. It's a satisfying book and it's a story that needs to be told. Well, listeners, we've got a lot of fantastic authors that are coming up, and we are so excited. We've got Daniel Silva, #1 New York Times bestselling author with An Inside Job, Don Winslow, my goodness, The Final Score, Lou Berney, Crooks, A Family Portrait, Ashley Ream, The Peculiar Gift of July, Mariah Blake, They Poison the World, Life and Death in the Age of Forever Chemicals, Joanne Harris with the prequel to Chocolat, that book is called The End, Christina Baker Klein and Ann Burt with Please Don't Lie coming back on the show, Isabella Maldonado and Jeffrey Deaver coming back with The Grave Artist, Laura Griffin with Innocence Road, Alma Katsu with Fiend, and we continue to grow every week. Thank you for sharing our socials. We hope that you join us. You can find us on bookstorm.com. We're on Instagram, on X, on YouTube, and we know why you're coming back because your favorite authors are here on Bookstorm Podcast.